In today's video, I'm going to be showing you exactly how far I recommend taking a Dell Optiplex Gaming PC. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. The Dell Optiplex has finally returned to the channel, and today I'm going to be showing you the absolute max performance that I think is worth upgrading in one of these Dell Optiplex gaming PCs. And if you're new here and you want to see other gaming PC build guides just like this one, then hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode. But yeah, let's check this thing out. Today's video is brought to you by, wait for it, World of Warships. That's right, this ZTT video is now on the World of Warships train, or boat, I should say, with all of the other YouTube content that I'm sure you've seen is sponsored by them as well. The reason this video is sponsored by World of Warships is because it's actually a worthy game of flooding all your YouTube videos that you're watching, because it's a thinking man's action game as it found the perfect balance of action and strategic gameplay. In World of Warships, which is free to play by the way, you command a massive naval fleet that features the world's most iconic war vessels such as the USS Indianapolis that allow you to dominate the oceans in some intense online gameplay. There's an incredible amount of detail in not just the hand-designed boat replicas from 3D scans of real-life vessels, but also even the weather effects that create unique challenges throughout the game. Every week there's new missions and updates to keep you coming back, and if you haven't started yet, my link down in the description will be a huge help with all of the bonuses. By using my link and the invite code BattleStations2020, you'll start off your account with 250 doubloons, 3 days of premium game time, 1 million credits, 1 port slot, and even a premium ship, the USS Charleston. Head on down to that link in the description to check out the action and strategy game that you've been searching for, and don't forget to use the invite code BattleStations2020. Alright, so the bread and butter of this gaming PC build guide is definitely the Dell Optiplex. I've featured these a ton on my channel in the past 2 years, but I do want to shine the light on this one specifically. This here is an Optiplex 9020, and it has pretty much the max specs that an Optiplex can have without it being super overpriced like the new current models. It's rocking an Intel i5-4570, which is a very capable CPU, rocking 4 cores and 4 threads that boost up to 3.6 GHz, 16 GB of DDR3 RAM, and it even came with a 1 TB HDD. All over the internet, you'll find these Dell Optiplexes, but with cheaper i5s, like maybe a 3470, or maybe 8 GB of RAM, or even a smaller HDD. This here is the exact specs that I would shoot for, and you want to spend around $100 for it. I personally paid $105 for mine off eBay, and this thing is an absolute perfect start to maxing out a Dell Optiplex gaming PC. I'll have a link to eBay down in the video description. So next up for the upgrades, the first one that I would definitely recommend making is adding an SSD. I went with the cheapest 120 GB model that I could find, which is the Inland model, which I featured in a ton of other build guides. It costs around $20 brand new off Amazon. Now I only went with the 120 GB model because we do have that 1 TB HDD, which is plenty for housing all of our games. But if you do settle on an Optiplex that only has like a 250 GB or 500 GB HDD, I would certainly recommend spending a little bit more on your SSD and make it a little bit bigger. Next up, we need to add a better power supply so we can put a better graphics card in there. Here's where I would recommend any 500-ish watt power supply that's from a reputable company and for around $40. I personally went with this Thermaltake 500 watt smart unit because it's been consistently at $41 new. Now one thing to note is that for some of these Dell Optiplexes, they actually come with a proprietary PSU connector on the motherboard, so you'll have to pick up one of these 24-pin to 8-pin power connector adapters. I'll have it linked down in the description. It's actually labeled online specifically for the Dell Optiplex, so make sure you buy the one that I link. Now I know a lot of you are going to say that these Dell Optiplexes come with decent power supplies, and I'll agree to some point, but for the most part, if you're going to be spending all this money on upgrades, I would really recommend just buying a better PSU, and a new one at that. You may indeed get away with putting something like a GTX 1650 in there with the stock PSU, but trust me, you do not want that freak accident of a 10-year-old power supply going bad and ruining all of the parts in your build, so I would highly recommend just spending the money on a new PSU. One other thing to note is that if your Optiplex is rocking 2 5-inch drives like mine is, you can pretty much kiss your cable management goodbye, as I usually stuff the cables in one of these 2 slots. And with that being said, our last part to upgrade is definitely the graphics card. Here's where I would recommend spending the majority of your budget, but I would not buy anything more than a GTX 1660. I actually made a video of putting a GTX 1660 Ti in a Dell Optiplex, and we did indeed have some CPU bottlenecking, so that's why I don't recommend going any further than a 1660. I wouldn't even go to a 1660 Super, to be honest. Now, the GTX 1660 is definitely still kind of expensive. You could get a way better price to performance balance with a cheaper graphics card like an RX 480 or an RX 580. Those would actually be really great options, but for this video, I'm trying to take this Dell Optiplex to the absolute max with it still making sense. I personally paid $220 for this EVGA 1660, and you'll also need to keep in mind that you don't have a ton of room for a GPU if you keep the Optiplex's hard drive cage in there. I initially bought this RX 580 from XFX in this build, but realized that it wouldn't fit. You could always remove this with a Dremel, but if you're like me and don't want to waste that kind of time, I would suggest finding a smaller GPU like I did. And finally, the last part that I decided to throw in here is purely for aesthetics, because if you're trying to max out an Optiplex gaming PC, you gotta get those few extra frames per second from the lighting. I ended up picking up this red Molex light kit for $11 off Amazon. This pairs perfectly with my modded side panel, and I made an entire dedicated video on how to do this in the video in the top right hand corner. So there you have it. This is what the final parts list is looking like, and like I said, this is the absolute max that I would take a Dell Optiplex gaming PC for both money spent and performance. Jumping straight into the benchmarks, the first game I fired up was Fortnite, and at 1080p and pro settings with a locked 144 FPS, I got right at that max with a 143 FPS average. Next up was Counter-Strike Global Offensive, also ran this one at 1080p and pro settings, and here I got an average of 181, so there's definitely some room to crank the settings up a bit more on this one. Following that was PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. I selected this one at 1080p and medium settings, and with that here I got a solid FPS average of 113. For our last easier to run game, I used the Rainbow Six Siege built-in benchmarking tool, and with 1080p and high settings, this Optiplex gaming PC averaged 170 frames per second. Getting into the way tougher to run games, Call of Duty Modern Warfare followed up next, and in 1080p and medium settings, we got way higher than I thought it would be at 106 FPS. Borderlands 3 was up next. I have dedicated benchmarking videos for all of these games, by the way, and in 1080p and medium settings, this system averaged 75 FPS. And finally, for our last gaming benchmark, we have Gears 5. Here I could actually crank up the settings to 1080p and high, which is super impressive for a used $400 gaming PC, and with that I got an average of 77 frames per second. And for those of you interested in Cinebench, in the R20 version, our i5 4570 was able to crank out a score of 1,137. So there you have it, pretty impressive results for a used $400 gaming PC, and like I said, this is the absolute max that I would ever recommend taking a Dell Optiplex gaming PC. As always, drop a comment down below about what you thought of this system or what you would personally do to change it. And after that, feel free to head on over to one of these two videos if you haven't seen them yet, and definitely hit that subscribe button, because coming up next, we're checking out a gaming laptop that's even cheaper than this. You don't want to miss that video.